Can you read us a bedtime story, please, Heck, please?
All right, you kids get to bed, and I'll get the storybook.
As a young boy, my family didn't have much. We could only afford the bare essentials: food, clothing, and shelter. Toys were a luxury we couldn't afford, which forced me to develop a vivid imagination. While other kids saw a stick, I saw a broadsword capable of cutting through the strongest materials. Where they saw a plain rock, I saw a precious gem that needed protection at all costs. With my sword in hand, a stick, and my shield, a sack stuffed with leaves, I would imagine vanquishing any foe who dared threaten my imaginary kingdom. Those childhood adventures were my escape, fueled by a boundless creativity that made every day an adventure. As I grew older, my family moved around a lot. We lived in different cities and states, and my father even considered taking us overseas. These constant changes exposed me to a wide variety of communities and made me realize at an early age that deep down, we're all the same. Most of us want peace, and we all want children to thrive. What fascinated me most were the subtle differences between us, how culture and environment shape our perspectives. Over time, my fascination narrowed to focus on children, especially infants and toddlers. They are filled with wonder and excitement, completely absorbed by the world's simplest joys. It astounded me. When, where, and why do adults lose that sense of awe? How does life, the one thing we should cherish, become something we take for granted? When I was old enough to leave home, I joined the Navy. I thought it would give me purpose and direction, and it did, but in a way I hadn't expected. Life at sea with my Navy brothers had a profound effect on me. One night in the cafeteria, I overheard some officers talking about their children. One of them lamented that it would be his third Christmas in a row away from his kids. I'm not a father, but the despair in his voice resonated deeply. Later that night, as I wandered the ship, I noticed the absence of joy, beauty, and warmth on board. It felt cold, not physically, but emotionally, like something essential was missing. That feeling lingered for days. I performed my duties, but my mind kept returning to the same thought: the children. How many kids have lost their parents to war? How many are left longing for a hug or a bedtime story? I felt a growing compulsion to do something, but I had no idea what. As time passed, I began using my creativity as an outlet for my frustration. The ship was full of scraps and discarded materials, and I started repurposing them to craft toys. After a long day of Navy duties, I'd return to my dorm and spend my evenings creating. At first, my shipmates thought it was odd. Some grumbled about the noise or how it interfered with their sleep. But everything changed the day I crafted a teddy bear. I made it from corduroy, using cotton from my own pillow for stuffing. Along with some odds and ends, I scavenged around the ship. When it was finished, I handed it to the officer who had been lamenting missing another Christmas with his kids. He held it in silence for a moment, his hands trembling slightly, then clutched it to his chest. "You're a saint," he said, his voice cracking. "If I can't be present, at least I can still send one." Those words stuck with me. The gratitude in his voice, the way his face lit up, it was like a light had been turned on in a dark room. For the first time in years, I felt like I was doing something meaningful. Word about the teddy bear spread quickly, and soon the once solemn atmosphere aboard the ship began to shift. Within days, shipmates started approaching me, asking if I could make something for their children. I agreed, but I made one thing clear. They had to bring me the right materials for whatever they wanted. That rule wasn't negotiable. At first, the nickname Saint stuck. Everyone admired what I was doing, and they teased me good-naturedly about it. But as the requests piled up, so did the frustration. Some of my shipmates would show up with scraps that were completely useless for what they were asking. One guy brought me a pile of old wires and asked for a doll. I stared at him for a moment before snapping, "Are you an idiot? How am I supposed to make a doll out of this? What do you think I am? A miracle worker?" That's when the joke started. "Careful, Saint's got a clause," someone shouted after I rejected another ridiculous request. "If you don't bring him what he needs, he'll put you on the naughty list." The name Saint quickly evolved into Santa Claus. They'd laugh and say, "Santa's got a list, and he's checking it twice. Better not mess it up or he'll lose it." As the days passed, my dorm became something of a workshop, cluttered with tools, parts, and half-finished projects. I poured myself into each request, challenging myself to make something extraordinary out of whatever scraps I was given. For one sailor, I built a toy train. The body was constructed from empty food cans, meticulously shaped and soldered together. I carved wheels from old mop handles, sanding them smooth so they turned perfectly on axles made from bent nails. I even rigged a small hand crank mechanism, so when the train was pushed, the wheels moved in harmony, gliding effortlessly across the floor. Another asked for a dollhouse for his daughter. I used wooden crates for the structure, cutting windows and doors with the precision of a craftsman. Shards of glass from a broken mirror became windows, and bits of spare wire made delicate railings for the porch. I fashioned tiny furniture from scraps of metal and wood, each chair, table, and bed polished to the best shine I could manage. But my proudest piece might have been the miniature ship for the captain's son. It was no simple model. I designed it with working rudders and a sail fashioned from scraps of canvas. The hull was pieced together with discarded planks from supply crates, sanded until smooth. I even found a way to balance it so it could float in water. When the captain came to inspect the finished product, he let out a low whistle and muttered, "You're wasted as a sailor." By then, my list of requests had grown longer than I'd ever imagined. My shipmates, once skeptical, were now my biggest supporters, gathering materials, lending tools, and pitching in when needed. They'd watch me work, shaking their heads in amazement at the detail and care I put into each project. "Santa Claus strikes again," they'd joke. "You'd better bring the man what he needs or else." I didn't care about the teasing. I was demanding, sure, but I wasn't about to send someone home with something half-finished or poorly made. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. The crude scraps we had aboard that ship were nothing compared to the joy they would bring, and I wasn't about to let anyone down. One evening, after a long week of crafting, we docked at a port in the far north. My shipmates insisted I take a night off. "You've earned it, Saint," one of them teased. Reluctantly, I joined them, and before long we found ourselves at a cozy bar, the kind of place where the warmth of the fire made you forget the bitter chill outside. We drank and sang all night, the camaraderie wrapping around us like an old blanket. I didn't know until then that a few of the fellas had surprisingly good voices. They belted out a song called Santa Claus of the Seven Seas, capturing the essence of what had recently unfolded aboard the ship. It was a playful nod to me, their saint, and the way I'd brought a little joy into our lives during such a hard season. I was overcome with joy, and more than a little liquor. A warm euphoria swept over me, and time seemed to blur. I couldn't tell if minutes or hours passed, but eventually I must have fallen asleep, my exhaustion from weeks of crafting finally catching up with me. When I woke, my head was heavy, and the bar was quiet. A note was left by my shipmates. "You were too heavy for 8 of us to carry back to the ship. Sorry, Saint. See you on board." I blinked at the note, groaning. 8 guys couldn't carry me. I knew I'd put on a few pounds, but that had to be a joke. Right? Gathering my things, I headed out into the cold. My breath hung in the air like smoke, and I trudged through the snow, convinced I knew the way back to the ship. At first, I laughed off the situation, but as the alcohol wore off, so did my confidence. The cold was biting now, clawing through my clothes. The further I walked, the less familiar everything seemed. I tried to shake off the creeping fear that I was lost, but with every step it grew harder to deny. Then, through the haze of snow, I spotted what looked like an igloo. Relief coursed through me as I stumbled toward it, but my voice betrayed me when I tried to shout for help. Nothing came out but a hoarse rasp. My legs gave out, and I collapsed near the little structure, the cold pulling me under. When I woke, I wasn't outside anymore. I was lying in a small, cozy bed, warmer than I'd been in days. The room was beautifully crafted, like something out of a dream. Every detail seemed purposeful. The intricate carvings on the walls, the gentle golden glow of the lamps, even the faint scent of cinnamon in the air. I tried to sit up, but my body felt heavy. The last thing I remembered was collapsing in the snow. The door creaked open, and in walked the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Her hair shimmered like spun silver, her eyes as warm as the hearth. She moved with grace, as though she belonged to a world untouched by the harshness I'd known. 4 figures followed her, shorter than any adults I'd ever met, but clearly not children. Their features were sharp, their eyes wise and ancient. They weren't people as I knew them. They were something else entirely. The woman smiled at me, her voice gentle. "I know you're awake, Chris. There's no need to pretend." Startled, I sat up fully. "How do you know my name?" I asked, my voice cracking. She held up a small card. "Your naval ID," she said. "Chris Kringle. We found it when we brought you inside. You're lucky my friends saw you when they did." I glanced around at the 4 figures. They were murmuring among themselves, studying me with curious expressions. One of them gave a quick wave before returning to whispering. "Where am I?" I asked, looking back at her. "You're safe," she assured me, stepping closer. "You collapsed near our home. We brought you here to recover." "Home?" I asked, still confused. "Who are you?" She smiled warmly. "I'm Missy, and these are my companions. We live here, far from most people, but fate must have brought you to us, Chris. You have a light within you. It drew you here." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. "A light? I think you've got the wrong guy. I'm just a sailor trying to get back to my ship." Missy chuckled softly, her laughter like the sound of bells. "You're more than that, Chris. The toys you make, the joy you bring, it's rare to find someone with such a heart. But I think you've only just begun to discover what you're capable of." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, shaking my head. She stepped even closer, her gaze holding mine. "Let me show you." Missy reached out and took my hand in hers. Her touch was warm, comforting, yet charged with an energy I couldn't explain. "Come with me," she said softly. She led me out of the room, into the snowy expanse beyond. The cold bit at my skin, but her presence seemed to keep the chill at bay. Standing in the snow was a small, simple snowman, a lopsided figure I might have built as a kid. Missy raised her free hand, and I watched, dumbstruck, as her fingers glowed faintly with a golden light. The snowman shuddered. Its stick arms wiggled, and its coal eyes blinked. Then, to my utter disbelief, it turned its head and looked at me. "Evening," it said in a gravelly voice, tipping its hat. I stumbled back, my mouth hanging open. "What in the—" Missy laughed again, and the snowman joined in, its carrot nose bobbing with each chuckle. "That's impossible," I stammered. "With Christmas magic, nothing is impossible," Missy said, her voice soft but firm. "It's the power to bring joy, to spark wonder, to light up the darkest nights. And Chris, it's a power that's been waiting for you." "Me?" I asked, still staring at the animated snowman. She nodded. "I can feel it in you. The same light that makes your toys. The same light that brought your shipmates hope. You've already begun to spread it. All you need now is the magic to carry it farther." Before I could respond, there was a loud snort behind me. I turned to see a reindeer, sleek and strong, pawing at the snow. Missy extended her hand, and with another shimmer of golden light, the reindeer lifted off the ground, hovering a few feet in the air. It kicked playfully before touching back down. My knees nearly gave out. "You can't expect me to believe this is real," I whispered. Missy smiled and stepped closer, her hand still in mine. "Believe it or not, it's happening. And now, Chris, it's your turn." The glow from her hand traveled up my arm, flooding me with warmth. My mind was filled with images, smiling children opening gifts, families gathered around fires, snowflakes drifting through starlit skies. It was overwhelming, yet it felt right. When the light faded, I looked at Missy, unsure of what had just happened. She met my gaze, her expression soft and knowing. "You have it now, the Christmas magic, but Chris, it doesn't create joy. It only amplifies what's already in your heart. That's why it chose you." I didn't know what to say. All I could do was stand there, feeling the new power that pulsed quietly within me, waiting to be used. Missy tilted her head, studying me with a gentle smile. "So, Chris Kringle, what will you do with your gift?" Dumbstruck by what had just happened, I could barely string together words to thank Missy. She smiled knowingly, as if she'd seen this ore before. "Go on, Chris. Your journey isn't over yet," she said softly, her voice like a warm fire on a cold night. I gathered my uniform, still damp from the snow, and dressed quickly. The fabric felt foreign now, as if I were putting on the clothes of a man I used to be. But I brushed the thought aside. With one final glance at Missy and her strange companions, I stepped out of the house. To my astonishment, we were inside the igloo, or what had seemed to be an igloo. From the outside, it was nothing more than a mound of snow, but Christmas magic, as Missy called it, had transformed the space within into something extraordinary. The illusion faded as I stepped away, the structure shrinking back into a simple snowy dome. As I turned, I spotted the same reindeer from before, grazing lazily near the edge of a clearing. I could feel the warmth of the magic coursing through me, urging me to try. Missy's words echoed in my mind. It amplifies what's already in your heart. With a deep breath, I approached the reindeer. It raised its head and snorted, its antlers gleaming in the pale light. "All right, boy," I muttered, holding out a hand. "Let's see if this really works." I focused, imagining the glow I'd felt in Missy's hand. I reached out tentatively, letting the magic flow through me and into the creature. At first, nothing happened. The reindeer just blinked at me, unimpressed. I furrowed my brow, trying again. This time, the faintest shimmer of light flickered around its hooves. The reindeer huffed, shifting its weight uncomfortably. "Come on," I whispered, frustration creeping into my voice. "I know I can do this." The third time, I closed my eyes and thought about the feeling Missy had given me. Warmth, joy, and wonder. I let it fill me, pushing aside doubt and frustration. When I opened my eyes, the reindeer's hooves were glowing steadily, a soft golden light that pulsed with my heartbeat. "All right," I said with a grin. "Let's see what you can do." The reindeer hesitated at first, pawing the ground nervously. Then, with a mighty leap, it took off, soaring clumsily a few feet into the air before crashing back down into a snowbank. I winced as the reindeer shook itself off, glaring at me like it blamed me for the mishap. "Sorry, boy," I said, patting its flank. "Let's try again." It took a few more attempts, each one sending the reindeer higher and farther, but eventually it clicked. The magic flowed freely, lifting the creature into the sky with ease. The reindeer kicked playfully, its movements graceful and confident. I let out a whoop of triumph as it circled above me, the light from its hooves casting shimmering patterns on the snow. "That's it!" I shouted. The reindeer descended, landing softly in front of me. I climbed onto its back, gripping its antlers for balance. "All right, let's get me back to the ship." With a powerful leap, the reindeer took off, soaring above the snowy landscape. The wind whipped at my face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed. The world below was quiet, a sea of white broken only by the dark outline of the harbor. I guided the reindeer toward the ship, my heart pounding as I spotted the familiar vessel. As we approached, I realized I couldn't let anyone see this. What would they think? A flying reindeer? They'd think I'd lost my mind, or worse. "Down, boy," I whispered, guiding the creature to land behind a row of tall trees. I slid off its back, giving it a final pat. "Thanks for the ride," I said. The reindeer snorted, nudging me gently before bounding off into the forest. I crept toward the ship, my boots crunching softly in the snow. To my surprise, everything looked normal. My shipmates were laughing and joking, the same as when we'd left the bar. "Hey, Saint!" one of them called out as I climbed aboard. "Managed to sleep off the drinks, huh?" I froze, glancing at the sky. It had felt like hours, but the sun hadn't moved. Time hadn't moved. "Yeah," I said, laughing nervously. "Guess being round with pounds and bound to the ground has its benefits, huh?" The crew roared with laughter, and I joined in, my mind racing. I didn't know how much of what had happened I'd ever tell them, or if they'd believe me if I did. All I knew was that I wasn't the same man who'd stumbled off that ship the night before. Something had changed, and deep down, I knew my life would never be the same. 'Twas the night before Christmas, and the ship was in an uproar. The captain had arranged for presents to be delivered by mail, but a brutal storm had struck just a few days prior, making it impossible for the mail to be picked up. The toys for girls and boys of all kinds and sizes, meant to bring joy, now sat untouched, a painful reminder of what we were all missing. The air on the ship grew heavy with despair as shipmates quietly mourned the distance between themselves and their families. I had been practicing my Christmas magic discreetly ever since I left Missy that night. She was right. There was something in me that responded to her words, a deep well of magic waiting to be tapped. Slowly, I'd grown confident in small abilities. With focus, I discovered I could manipulate time, borrowing a few extra hours each night without anyone noticing. I used those hours to perfect my craft, working tirelessly on gifts to bring smiles to my shipmates. It seemed Christmas magic didn't just make work easier, it made it meaningful. The captain called everyone to the lower deck, delivering a speech to lift our spirits. His words were strong and reassuring. Men, I know this year has been harder than most. We've fought through storms, through battles, through everything the world has thrown at us. And while I know nothing can replace the feeling of being home with our families, remember this: we're not alone. Look around you. You're surrounded by your brothers, by those who would give anything to keep you safe. We may not have made it back to our loved ones, but that doesn't mean we're without love this Christmas. The speech struck something deep in me. This wasn't just about the toys or the storm, it was about the hope we all needed. I realized I had to act. Tonight, I would find the limits of my powers. Back in my quarters, I stared at the mountain of presents stored below deck. My mind raced. How could I possibly deliver them all? Not to my shipmates, but to their families. I glanced at the small sack Missy had given me the night we met. She had called it a bag of wonders, though at the time, I thought it was more a poetic flourish than anything magical. "Let's see what you can do," I muttered, grabbing the sack and heading for the hold. I reached for the first gift, a wooden rocking horse nearly as tall as me, and hesitated. There was no way this would fit. Still, something told me to trust in the magic. I took a deep breath and tried. The moment I placed the gift at the mouth of the sack, it disappeared, sucked inside like a whisper of air. I opened the bag to look inside, but all I saw was darkness, endless and vast. My jaw dropped. I began loading more items. A toy train set, a dollhouse, an entire box of toy soldiers. They all vanished into the bag without so much as a bulge. It was almost weightless, no matter how much I packed in. By the time I was finished, the sack held every single present in the hold, yet it hung at my side as if it were empty. I slung the bag over my shoulder, excitement bubbling inside me. But now came the hard part. How would I get them to families scattered across the world? The answer came to me almost instinctively. The reindeer. Summoning it wasn't new to me, but this time it felt different. I focused my magic, whispering softly, calling the reindeer into existence. At first, nothing happened. I tried again, speaking louder, willing the magic to respond. A shimmer of light appeared, and from it emerged a reindeer, its antlers gleaming like silver under the moonlight. The moment the reindeer appeared, it was already in motion. It bolted toward me in a blur of speed, circling around with such swiftness that the snow beneath it swirled into a small flurry. I stepped back, startled but in awe. "Whoa there, fella!" I called out as it skidded to a halt in front of me, its dark eyes locking with mine. I placed a hand on its neck, feeling the strength and energy pulsing beneath its fur. "You're quick, aren't you?" I said softly, marveling at the creature. "I think I'll call you Dasher." The reindeer snorted, as if it approved of the name, and I couldn't help but grin. Climbing onto its back, I whispered, "All right, Dasher, let's see if we can fly." Dasher stomped his hooves and gave a small leap forward, but we didn't leave the ground. I tried again, tugging gently on the reins. Still nothing. Frustration welled up in me. I knew the magic was there, but I couldn't force it. Then Missy's words came back to me. Magic isn't about commanding, it's about believing. I closed my eyes, picturing Dasher soaring through the sky. I let go of my doubt, focusing instead on the possibility, the wonder of it all. "You can do this," I whispered, my voice filled with quiet conviction. Dasher shifted beneath me, then leapt into the air. I gasped as we lifted off the ground, the wind whipping against my face. We wobbled unsteadily at first, but I held on, guiding us higher and higher. Soon, we were soaring above the ship, the stars glittering like 1,000 tiny beacons. A laugh escaped me, wild and exhilarated. "We're flying!" I shouted, the joy of the moment overwhelming me. As we climbed higher, the weight of the sack seemed to vanish entirely, the magic of it working in harmony with Dasher's powerful strides through the sky. Together, we prepared to deliver Christmas to the families of my shipmates. Tonight, hope would not be lost. I grabbed tightly onto Dasher's reins, feeling the excitement and determination surge through me. Okay, Christmas magic, let's see what we can do, I murmured. Dasher snorted, his hoofs stamping on the rooftop as we prepared for the next leg of our journey. Tonight, I wasn't just delivering presents, I was delivering a piece of love and strength to a family. Walt Franklin, a sailor, had once shared with me that a black man often finds more storms on land than he has at sea. I admired his resilience, and tonight, I wanted to honor that. I wanted to show his children, Wilma, Whitney, Winter, and Walt Jr., the love their father had for them, despite the challenges he faced. I closed my eyes, visualizing their home in Philadelphia, the small brick house nestled in the city's heart. I saw the children's faces, the gifts they'd been waiting for. Wilma's handmade doll, Whitney's red scarf, Winter's magical book, Walt Jr.'s model train. These were the gifts their father had specifically requested, and they were now nestled in the sack, ready to be delivered. Dasher whinnied, and in a flash, we were on our way, the world blurring past us as we sped through the night. The rush was exhilarating, but I could feel the toll was taking. Magic, after all, wasn't infinite. And as the city of Philadelphia finally came into view, I could feel my energy starting to wane. We had traveled far, over 3,000 miles, and though I was determined, I knew I couldn't push my limits too far. I landed softly on the roof of the Franklin home, the cold night air biting at my skin. Dasher, barely able to stand, sank to the roof in exhaustion. Easy, Dasher, I whispered, rubbing his neck. Now the real challenge began. I hadn't thought through the logistics of delivery. Just leaving the presents at the front door wasn't an option. Someone might take them before morning. Climbing through a window might be risky too, with the possibility of someone noticing me. A neighbor, a passerby, anyone could spot me. That's when I noticed the chimney. At first I hesitated. The chimney wasn't designed for someone my size. But then I remembered the most important rule of Christmas magic, imagination. I closed my eyes and pictured the chimney in my mind, visualizing the narrow space and how I could fit through it. In my imagination, the space expanded with my thoughts. The more I focused, the more the chimney seemed to shift and mold itself, widening just enough for me to pass through. I opened my eyes, and sure enough, the chimney had transformed. It was no longer a constricting, narrow passage. It felt just right, like it had been made for me. With a deep breath, I stepped forward, feeling the smooth curves of the walls as I moved. When I landed softly on the floor of the living room, the soft crackle of the fire in the hearth welcomed me. The space was warm and inviting, the tree standing tall with a soft glow emanating from the lights. The gifts, now safely in my sack, were ready for their rightful owners. I reached inside, and each gift came out effortlessly. Wilma's doll, Whitney's scarf, Walt Jr.'s train set, and Winter's magical book all appeared in my hands without searching. The bag had organized everything perfectly, almost as if it anticipated the moment. I placed each gift carefully under the tree, taking a moment to appreciate the beauty of the scene. This wasn't just about delivering presents, it was about the love they represented. The magic in the air wasn't just in the bag, it was in the belief, in the love, and in the shared moments of joy. I exited the way I came, swiftly ascending the chimney. The sensation was almost euphoric. I felt lighter than air as I rose, like the magic was lifting me effortlessly. Back on the roof, I found Dasher already starting to recover, his breaths less labored and his posture steadying. "You ready, boy?" I asked, patting his flank as I climbed back onto his back. He snorted, shaking his head as if to say, "Let's go." I knew I had to be smarter about how I traveled. Magic wasn't infinite, and I still had 63 more families to visit all across the nation. I'd need to conserve my strength and use the magic strategically. To my surprise, it was as though Christmas magic had transformed me into a geography wizard. I could instinctively recall every state, every city, even the smallest, most obscure towns. And when I focused on a specific name, it was like a beacon that guided me straight to their doorstep. My next stop was Pittsburgh. Big Pete Patterson was a shipmate of mine, a giant of a man with a heart just as large. He had 2 preteen sons, Paul and Preston, who were quickly growing to match their father's size. I closed my eyes and concentrated on the twins. Their images came into focus. With a nudge to Dasher, we were off. This time, I decided not to rely on the full extent of Christmas magic. Instead, flew across the sky, his hooves gliding over an invisible energy trail, faint but sturdy. The journey wasn't as instantaneous, but we still made great time. The wind whipped around us as we soared through the night, covering the distance in just under 10 minutes, traveling at nearly 400 miles per hour. It was exhilarating, and I felt far less drained than after the last trip, though I was still nowhere near full strength. We arrived at a secluded log cabin on the outskirts of town. The place was quiet, surrounded by a patch of woods and dotted with broken-down wagons and tools scattered across the property. It seemed Paul and Preston were already handy with their hands, much like their father. The chimney here was wider than the last one, but I still closed my eyes and focused, imagining myself descending smoothly. The magic responded instantly, shrinking me in just the right way and easing my passage. I landed softly in the fireplace, brushing off a bit of soot as I stepped into the dimly lit room. The house was plain and lacking much in the way of Christmas spirit. No lights, no garlands, no signs of the season, just the faint hum of the fireplace. I suppose the boys were at that age where the magic of Christmas starts to fade, their focus shifting to other things. But that didn't matter tonight. It was my job to rekindle a bit of that spirit, to remind them of the love and joy their father carried for them, even from afar. Pete had requested something special for his boys this year, a working horse wagon with a set of model horses. The wagon was crafted from sturdy maple wood, complete with miniature iron wheels that could roll smoothly over any surface. The horses were hand-carved from birch, polished to a fine sheen, with intricate details in their manes and tails. It was a beautiful set, a testament to Pete's love for his boys and their shared interest in building things together. After placing the wagon and horses near the tree, I glanced around the cabin. The room felt so bare, like the season hadn't found its way here. The absence of Christmas spirit tugged at me, and I couldn't leave it like this. Not after all Pete had done for me over the years. I closed my eyes and focused, drawing on that deep well of Christmas magic. With a wave of my hand, the room transformed before me. Garlands of evergreen draped themselves across the walls, twinkling with soft golden lights. A tree sprang to life in the corner, its branches adorned with shimmering ornaments and a glowing star at the top. Stockings appeared above the fireplace, each embroidered with the boys' names. The air even took on the faint scent of pine and cinnamon. The cabin felt alive now, full of the magic of the season, but I wasn't finished. My eyes returned to the wagon and horses. I stepped closer and imagined them not as toys, but as something much grander. I held out my hand, letting the magic flow. The wagon and horses began to shift. The wagon's wooden frame expanded, strengthening as the iron wheels stretched and gleamed like freshly polished metal. The carved horses trembled as they transformed, their wooden surfaces softening into sleek, muscular bodies. They pawed at the ground, snorting gently as they came to life, their manes rippling like real hair. The magical pair stood tall but gentle, moving in unison as they trotted to the corner by the tree, their harness jingling softly. They stood still, as if knowing their place, waiting for the boys to discover them. I didn't have long to admire my handiwork. Almost as soon as I finished, I heard a faint rustle from the hallway. Mrs. Patterson was awake. Whether it was intuition or the magic in the air that had drawn her, I wasn't sure, but I couldn't risk being seen. I darted back to the fireplace, slipping up the chimney in a blur, the magic lifting me effortlessly. Once on the roof, I paused for a moment, peeking through the frosty window. Inside, Mrs. Patterson stood in the living room, her eyes wide with disbelief. She quickly woke her sons, and the three of them gathered around the tree, staring at the decorations and gifts in awe. The boys froze when they saw the wagon and horses, their jaws dropping. For a brief moment, I chuckled to myself, realizing they might have a bit of a challenge, figuring out how to get a full-sized wagon and 2 horses out of the house. Judging by the wonder on on their faces, that was a problem for another time. For now, the magic of the moment was all that mattered. Their faces lit up as they embraced, the warmth of the moment radiating even through the cold night air. I smiled, tossing my sack over my shoulder and climbing onto Dasher's back. "Come on, little buddy," I said, giving him a reassuring pat. 2 down, 62 more to go. With that, we leapt into the sky, the faint glow of the cabin fading behind us as we soared toward the next stop. Dasher and I soared through the frosty night, the stars guiding us as we crossed the vast landscapes of a growing nation. New destination carried its own quiet magic, and with every home we visited, I felt more connected to the children, the families, and the hopes they clung to, even in these challenging times. In Boston, the streets were narrow, lined with brick buildings and cobblestone paths. Inside one modest home, I left a chess set for a boy whose father hoped he'd sharpen his mind and learn the patience of a strategist. From the bustling cities to the quiet villages, the journey was exhilarating. In Providence, I found the humble abode of a shipbuilder. His son had dreams of the sea, and a model schooner was left on the windowsill to stoke his imagination. Farther south in Charleston, I slipped into a cozy home where a fiddle was waiting for a boy who hummed melodies in his sleep. I could almost hear the songs he'd soon play, filling his home with life. The air grew colder as I traveled westward. In the rugged hills of the Ohio Valley, I left a whistle for a boy fascinated by steam engines, and in another cabin, a wool coat for a boy who braved the freezing winds to help his family survive the harsh winters. New Orleans felt alive, even in the stillness of night. The ornate iron balconies gleamed in the moonlight. I left a box of paints for a child who filled every spare corner of the home with sketches. I imagined those paints bringing life to their visions of the vibrant city they called home. Heading toward the Great Lakes, I marveled at the icy beauty of the land below. In one small house, I placed a pair of skates by the door for a boy who loved the frozen ponds near his home. At another, I left a carved rocking horse for a child whose heart was already set on the open plains. As I traveled through Baltimore, the harbor lights reflected off the water like 1,000 tiny candles. I left an atlas for a boy who spent his evenings studying maps, dreaming of exploring lands far beyond the city's borders. The frontier was wilder, its homes scattered and resilient. A flintlock replica was carefully placed for a boy learning to protect his family's homestead. In another cabin, a stack of books for a budding scholar eager to learn about the world beyond the wilderness. Each house carried its own story, and with every gift, I felt a spark of joy. The world may have been harsh and unforgiving at times, but these small acts of giving reminded me of the endless potential in every child. 50 deliveries in, I paused atop a quiet rooftop, the sack growing lighter, yet still full of possibilities. "Almost there, Dasher," I whispered, rubbing his side. He snorted softly, his breath curling into the cold night air. The stars above seemed to cheer us on as we prepared for the final leg of this incredible journey. With renewed determination, we took to the skies, the horizon glowing faintly with the promise of dawn. I arrived at the next house and saw the remnants of a Christmas celebration. On the table, a plate of homemade chocolate chip cookies sat, half eaten, along with a glass of milk, though no one was expecting me. The house was quiet and still, the warmth of the hearth filling the air. I quickly went about my work, delivering the gifts with precision, but it was hard not to notice the cookies. The smell of the freshly baked treats was intoxicating, rich and buttery with the perfect hint of sweetness from the chocolate. My stomach rumbled in response, and I couldn't resist. I grabbed a cookie, breaking off a chunk. The first bite was a revelation. It was perfectly crispy on the edges, soft in the middle, with the ideal balance of sweetness and chocolate. I felt a wave of warmth spread through me, and I took another bite, savoring the taste. It wasn't just the hunger, it was something more. The cookies felt like home, like comfort in the midst of a long night's work. Once I'd eaten my fill, I felt a surge of renewed energy. The cookies and milk had worked their magic, and I was ready to finish the rest of my journey. After finishing the last of the cookies, I couldn't help but smile. The warm, gooey chocolate chip cookies had a buttery richness. The melted chocolate chips in each bite were the perfect balance of sweetness. I'd been traveling for what seemed like forever, and the cookies filled me with a sense of comfort. The soft warmth and flavor lingered in my mouth as I savored every last bite. I hadn't expected them, but I certainly appreciated the coincidence. It was just what I needed after the long stretch of deliveries. I also grabbed a few carrots and apples for Dasher, who had been keeping pace without a complaint. After his snack, I felt revitalized, ready to take on the rest of the deliveries. Only 12 homes left. This was almost done. I made my way to the next stop. A set of 3 teepees, each belonging to one of Malcolm's children. Malcolm had been exiled from his village after a difficult relationship with the tribe, and though he was far from his native roots, he was still proud of his children. The 3 teepees were separated, each home to one of his children from different mothers, but I knew where I needed to go. I slipped quietly into the first teepee, where the soft breathing of Malcolm's oldest child filled the air. The gift I had for them was a set of beautifully handcrafted drums and congas, carved with intricate designs. These weren't just toys, they were a way to connect the child to Malcolm's heritage. I laid them by the bed, careful to leave no trace of my visit. Once the gift was set, I stepped lightly out of the first teepee and into the second. This time the gift was similar, a smaller set of congas, perfect for a younger child, carved and painted with loving detail. The child would wake up to find not only a toy, but a piece of their father's legacy. After slipping out of the second teepee, I made my way to the third. The youngest of Malcolm's children was still deep in sleep. I placed the third set of congas carefully by their bed, ensuring that it was positioned just right. I wanted them to wake up to the sound of drums in their dreams. As I quietly stepped out of the third teepee, I couldn't help but glance back, knowing how much these gifts would mean. There were no grand gestures here, just a simple connection to their father. With that, I climbed back onto Dasher's back, feeling a warmth spread through me. The work wasn't done, but each delivery felt like a small victory, a thread weaving through the fabric of the night. There was no turning back now. I had just a few homes left, but I knew each stop would be worth it. The next stop was for Thomas. I didn't know much about him, except that his behavior had been less than stellar. I had a large, beautifully wrapped box in my sack, its contents as fine as anything a child could hope for. But when I set it down in front of his door, I left him only one thing inside: a lump of coal. It wasn't a gesture of punishment, more a lesson, a reminder. The coal wasn't the end of the world, but a way for Thomas to reflect on his actions. Maybe this Christmas he'd learn what true kindness meant. With the lump of coal left carefully wrapped, I moved quickly on, knowing the night was running short and there were still families to visit. One by one, I continued delivering the gifts to the children of my shipmates. Each home held its own story, but they all shared the same sentiment. These fathers couldn't be with their children this Christmas. Each time I set down a gift, I was reminded of the love these parents had for their kids and the joy I could bring with just a small, simple gesture. The magic of Christmas carried me from one house to the next, and I continued to deliver, knowing that this journey, this mission, was more important than anything I'd done before. It wasn't about the gifts, it was about connection. With only a few more homes to go, I felt a peace settle over me. The end was in sight, and the children would wake up to find the gifts they'd always wanted. Gifts that would remind them that their fathers were thinking of them, even from far away. Just a little bit further, and Christmas would be complete. I counted off each one in my mind, visualizing the scenes. Each child waking up in awe, their little hearts swelling with the wonder of Christmas. Yes, all the gifts had been delivered, so I thought. But then, just as I was about to feel that sense of finality, the weight of the sack lightened, and I remembered there was one more. The captain's son. A little boy, far from his father, tucked away in the snowy hills of Vermont. I had nearly forgotten him in the haze of deliveries, but his gift was no ordinary one. The ship, the replica I had crafted with such care, was no simple trinket. It was something that connected his world with his father's, and a piece of magic I was about to bestow on him. I urged Dasher on, pushing renewed energy. This final delivery was important, not just because it was the last of the night, but because it was a promise kept to a man I respected deeply. The captain had always spoken of his son, and I knew how much this gift would mean to both of them. The house came into view, nestled among tall, frozen pines. The warmth of light from the window beckoned, and I guided Dasher toward the front door. I pulled the sack from my back, the weight of it now a reminder of the magic I'd been carrying all night. I set the model ship on the floor by the fire, its intricate details shining in the dim glow. As I whispered the magic, the ship came to life, not in the way most would expect, but as a shimmering, holographic image that hovered above the ship's deck, casting an ethereal glow on the surrounding room. The boy would awaken to find this magical sight. His father's face would appear before him, along with the faces of the crew, their smiles clear as day despite the distance. It was a gift that would keep his father close, even when he couldn't be there in person. I carefully placed the note beneath the ship's sail, knowing it would be the final touch. The words, written with a quiet sense of purpose, spoke of love and kindness. It wasn't just a gift, it was a message to carry into the new year. As the sun comes out and darkness falls, we understand our fellow man has flaws, but hear me now and forever. It's time that we all come together. 'Tis the season to be kind, 'cause the world's harsh all the time. And with this gift I leave a plea that kindness spreads for you and me. In your heart, let love be law, and know from now you'll hear my call. I hereby decree the Santa Claus. I stood there for a moment, watching the hologram flicker softly in the firelight. A sense of peace settled over me, knowing the boy would have this gift, his father's presence, made real, just as if he was standing next to him. With the last delivery made, the weight of my mission had finally lifted. I stepped back into the night, the chill air biting at my face. Dasher stood ready, hooves stirring up the freshly fallen snow as I hopped back onto the sleigh. "Come on, little buddy," I whispered to him. As we took off into the sky, the sleigh soaring higher with each passing second, I felt a strange kind of satisfaction. The world had been touched, and though my work was far from over, the first Christmas magic had woven its spell. The final delivery had been made, and with that, I could feel the beginning of something new, something timeless. Santa Claus, I said to myself, the name now heavy with meaning. I didn't need to say it aloud, but as I soared through the cold winter night, I knew it would be my name for years to come. It was the start of a legacy, and I was ready for it. And with that, we disappeared into the stars. The next day had been nothing short of incredible. My shipmates and officers had spent hours sharing stories about the mysterious Santa Claus, their faces alight with wonder. Telegrams kept arriving in waves, overflowing with gratitude and joy. By evening, Walt Franklin had outdone himself, preparing a seafood feast that rivaled anything I'd ever seen. The ship rang with laughter, music, and carols as we celebrated into the night. I joined in, but something felt off. As I looked around at my exhausted but happy shipmates, a nagging feeling tugged at me. It was as though a part of the celebration was missing. Then, like a spark of magic, an image of Missy's face entered my mind. I couldn't ignore it. I needed to see her. Slipping away under the cover of darkness, I summoned Dasher. I'd snagged a few cobs of corn from dinner. After feeding him, we were off. We traveled swiftly to where I had first seen the igloo. When we arrived, it appeared deserted, just as before. But something urged me to focus. I closed my eyes and let the Christmas magic guide me. When I opened them, the simple igloo had vanished, replaced by a breathtaking sight. Before me stood a magical winter palace, its icy walls glistening like diamonds under the moonlight. Towering candy canes framed the entrance, each striped in perfect spirals of red and white. Nutcracker soldiers stood guard at the gates, their painted faces regal and imposing. Massive pillars, carved with intricate designs of holly and ivy, rose 60 feet high, seamlessly blending into the structure. Snowflakes the size of dinner plates floated gently from the sky, sparkling as they landed on the palace grounds. The air smelled faintly of peppermint and cinnamon, and the faint sound of jingling bells carried on the wind. I stood in awe, completely captivated. "You found your way," came a soft voice from behind me. I turned. There she was. Missy stood with a knowing from completing my monumental task couldn't compare to the warmth her smile gave me. Missy, I stammered, trying to find the right words. Aye, she interrupted, laughing softly. Yes, you did. You brought so much joy to those children tonight. Her words made me pause. Missy, I don't understand. I thought you gave me the Christmas magic because of the calamity on the ship, so my mates could feel closer to their children. She nodded. I did, Chris. But the truth is, Christmas spirit in general is fading. For aeons, my people have protected its spark. Every few millennia, we find someone worthy to carry its power. That someone is you, I blinked, taking it in. Wait, aeons? Millennia? Missy, how old are you? She smirked, tilting her head playfully. Didn't your parents ever tell you not to ask a lady that? Fair enough, I said, chuckling despite myself. But what is my role in all of this? What am I supposed to do? Missy stepped closer, her voice soft but filled with purpose as she began to speak. You are the healer the world has been seeking, for boys and girls whose toys they'll be dreaming. The joy that it brings from providing these things will have the world once more believing that kindness is key, a joy to be polite, for Santa brings gifts to those who delight in behaving with manners both noble and true. For every good deed there's a reward due. But beware, dear Chris, for the naughty must learn a lump of coal is all they'll earn. For amidst the chaos, we must have order to guide our children past life's borders. This isn't just magic or fleeting wonder, it's a mission to heal the world's thunder. With every gift and every laugh, you'll show the world its better half. I let her words sink in, feeling the weight of their meaning. Missy smiled at me, her expression both encouraging and wise. Chris, she said, you've done something extraordinary tonight, but this is only the beginning. There's a world of Christmas magic out there waiting for you to embrace it. And you'll help me? I asked. I'll always be here when you need me, she replied. But the path ahead is yours to forge. As I mounted Dasher and prepared to return to the ship, I glanced back at Missy, who stood framed by the magical winter palace. I didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time, I felt ready to take it on. This concludes the Santa Claus origin story. May all your dreams keep shining bright. Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night.
Ho, 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 ho.